Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Shrabani Basu, Assistant Professor in the Department of English in St. Francis College for Women. The lesson that we would be looking at today is on the celebrated West Indian playwright Trevor Rhone, and in particular two of his plays, Old Story Time and School's Out. This lesson is part of the paper of African and Caribbean Writing in English. Now, in the next 25 minutes or so, we would be looking at some of the thematics and works of Trevor Rhone, some of his recurrent plot lines, some of his recurrent dynamics that he looks at in his plays, and also by the end of the lesson there would be a small self-assessment module where you could test your understanding of the lesson. Now, if we start with Trevor Rhone, it's important that we look at the life of Trevor Rhone, which makes him the playwright that he was. Now, he was born in 1940 and he passed away in 2009, and he grew up in Bellagate, a village in rural St. Catherine in Jamaica. So he is Anglophone. He attended Rose Bruford College in Kent in England between 1960 to 63, and then he came back to Kingston in Jamaica, where he, along with 7 companions, started the Barn Theatre. Trevor Rhone is very celebrated in Jamaica, less for his plays and more for all the scripts that he has written for blockbuster films. Some of the important plays which Trevor Rhone wrote are It's Not My Fault, Baby, 1967. The Gadget, which some say is a prelude to Old Story Time, which came out in 1968. Smile Orange, 1971, Sleeper, which came out in 1972, Comic Strip, which came out the following year, School's Out, which came out in 1974, Old Story Time, published in 1979, and Bellagate Boy, 2002. And many of these films were later adapted into films, which was scripted by Rhone himself. Some of those films are The Harder They Come, which made him extremely well known in Jamaican film industry, which came out in 1969, Smile Orange, which was released in 1974, Milk and Honey, which was released in 1988, and Top Rankin, which was released in 1988 again. Now, if we look at Old Story Time, the first play which we would go through in this short lesson of ours, the plot goes around a single mother, an elderly single mother, Miss Aggie, who brings up and educates her son Len almost single-handedly. She's one described by the narrator, Pa Ben, as somebody who mistrusts anybody who is dark-skinned, though she is one of that ethnicity. So it's a curious flip in her character which makes her despise something which describes her as well. Now, she wishes that her son would marry a relatively fair-skinned girl, Margaret, which would give them an entry to the higher echelon of fair-skinned people, and she's deeply disappointed when he does not. Now, Len educates his mother in the ways of accepting her own color and to accept the modern belief system together with her old customs and beliefs. But that does not initially in the play sits very well with Miss Aggie, because Miss Aggie's despise, her negrophobia, in a way is too deep-seated to change overnight. And this is the reason she also despises and openly abuses and condemns her own daughter-in-law, who, in her opinion, is dark-skinned and hence not good enough for her son. Now, later, it is disclosed that girl who she wanted Len to marry, Margaret, was cruel to Len at school, and the gentleman who she believes in to entrust him with many of her investments, George McFarlane, is crooked. Now, though she is abusive of her daughter-in-law Lois, who is dark-skinned, and though she blindly believes in George, a swindler, because he's brown-skinned, though we see that her characteristic is in a way looking into or more obsessed with whiteness, later she changes her opinion when Lois and Len, you would be probably finding the names very interesting, but though the Superman analogy here, the allusion here, fortunately stops. Now, when we look at the characters of Miss Aggie, she's a very powerful individual, a single parent who is hopelessly tied up in her old school beliefs and stereotyping. She, like most parents, aspires for a better life for her son, but that better life which she envisions for her son is tied to these old school stereotypes of whatever black is not good, quote unquote. She deplores any greater comfort which her son may provide her with, because he, in her opinion, has committed the greatest crime of all. He has aligned himself with a girl who is not fair-skinned. So in a way, it's almost a sacrilege. In spite of all her strength, she's deeply subservient to anything that is white. Now, Pa Ben, that quintessential storyteller, he describes Miss Aggie and her deep-seated negrophobia in almost one sentence, where he says, "You have to understand Miss Aggie. She wouldn't even have a black chicken in her yard. One chop and off with the head." Now, even at the end, she's humbled in her mistake and calls herself a foolish old woman before hugging Lois and Len. She frees herself from her prejudices and goes beyond them in search of love, strength, and confidence in her selfhood as a hybrid and dark-skinned individual. The other very important character who makes repeated entries as the all-observant storyteller is Pa Ben. And in a way, the character of Pa Ben is a foil to Miss Aggie. He's everything that Miss Aggie is not. He's the quintessential storyteller and who deplores the color bias of Miss Aggie, because in a way he recognizes it to be a derision of the selfhood that Miss Aggie represents or should. Now, he associates Africa with primitive savagery and England with progress and deliverance, and in a way that's as prejudiced as Miss Aggie's prejudice towards blackness. Now, he creates the suspense and the disclosure. He also acts as the instrument of peace and the crucial structural instrument. He protests against Miss Aggie's behavior towards her son and his wife, but he's also ready to forgive and forget when Miss Aggie starts acknowledging him after a long time, though they were not exactly in the best of relations, in the best of terms before this. Now, the next characters that we look at are Lois and Len. Now, they are educated, they are enlightened, and they try to bring their mother out of her prejudices. They accept their role as the post-colonial hybrid subject. They are not embarrassed, they are not subservient, and they are more accepting of their, Caribbean identity, if we call it. Len, the son, acknowledges his mother's sacrifices for his education and is hurt when she refuses his offers of help and comfort. Now, Lois's portrayal is in a way a topsy-turvy mixture of the stereotype of the black girl who is able to cross the color barrier and who has also succeeded in gaining employment in an exclusive institution, and it also has a mixture of the stereotypes of the modern woman who is intent on breaking the traditional mold in which she has been placed. So she is, in a way, a complicated and multi-layered character who very interestingly speaks in almost Victorian phrased English. She's assumed to be not inhibited by society's attitudes to male-female relationships as she makes sacrifices and works to assist Len through school. She was kind to Len in their childhood and helps him convince his mother of the reality of their existence and their life. Now, Lois is offended when Miss Aggie abuses her by calling her a dog, but she's also ready to forgive when she's humbled. So in a way, she's a representative of the younger generation, which should be more understanding of the fallacies and the misrepresented or misplaced stereotypical tendencies of the older generation. Now, the two fairer-skinned people, George McFarlane and Margaret, are the very classic negative characters. They're both fairer. The word comes now and again repeatedly in the play than the other characters of the play. But where George McFarlane attempts to swindle Miss Aggie and blackmail her son, Margaret is selfish, is self-centered, and she had also been cruel to Len in school and has humiliated Lois in the past. When we look at these characters in old story time, we see that Trevor Rhone imagines the characters to be members of each categories. So in a way, all these characters are typified into different categories. Now, for the next play that we would be looking at, that is Schools Out, we would also notice that most of the characters, even in School Out, are members, can be very crucially and very conveniently typified into the cubby holes of identity. Now, the only character which in a way shows to be or appears to be very helpless in her identity in old story time is Pearl. Now, she's the embodiment of the woman as a victim, the stereotype of the breeder identity of a woman whose cycles of pregnancies conforms her to the maintenance of the old order, the symbol of woman in her role of bearing children, and only that. She's initially a young girl full of life and potential, but also becomes a victim condemned by fate to remaining in the village. Her pregnancies confine her to her family and represents so little of the full humanity of her personality and identity. She used to enjoy a friendship with Len, which is marred later by Miss Aggie's prejudice but also by her own inferiority complex. Now, the next play that we would be looking at is Schools Out. And Schools Out, unlike old story time, has a very important and detailed stage direction. The principal stage prop is a malfunctioning and overflowing lavatory door dominating the stage. In the beginning of Act 2, there is also a permanent and hopeless out of order sign posted on the lavatory door, almost portraying the general condition of the school and the education system. Now, the staff members continually complain about the stench and the fact that nothing has ever been done to remedy the situation. The existence of the absentee headmaster of the school is visually signified through an imposing but never open door saying downright. We never see the headmaster. We sometimes hear him because many of the characters comment on and the audience can hear the sounds of caning from beyond that door. The plot overview of schools out, says that it develops around a new faculty member of a school whose name is Russ Dacres, and he very conscientiously attempts to improve the conditions of the school that he has newly joined. The only lady teacher of the school, Mica McAdam, helps him to find his way around the school. His initial impression of the school, which Russ Dacre very openly admits, is one of extreme disappointment because he finds the school in shambles. Now, Mr. Joseph, who is always called Joe, is found playing guitar and has a comic episode with the well-meaning but extremely underqualified and half-educated teacher, Hopal Hendry. The other teachers, Rosco Callender and Pat Campbell, enter complaining about the stench of the bath. The chaplain of the school makes lecherous advances towards Mica and also very openly shows Trevor Rhone's disregard of the clergy because he is shown to be somebody with an penchant towards sexual harassment. Now, Rosco plays a prank on Mica and Hendry by pretending to throw a mouse at Mica. When Mica panics and loses her consciousness, the chaplain attempts to molest her but fails as she wakes up. Now, this prologue and this, the first scene, in a way, also posits the entire play into a particular context of society, that is the gradual degradation of the education system. Now, the second to the fifth scene goes rather rapidly because in the second scene, Pat, one of the faculty members, verbally abuses Callender and Chaplain to Russ, while the chaplain wants Russ to be assertive and brutal with the students. In the third scene, Russ brings a tape recorder and a first aid box to the school. Now, Rosco insinuates that the students will steal them, but in a comic episode, he's the one who steals the tape recorder himself with some other things from the first aid box. He also notices that Russ is attracted towards Mica. Now, in the fourth scene, the staffs talk about the class magazines, abusing one and all of them and even dismissing the one that was actually good. And the audience also notices a tension between Pat and Mica. The fifth scene brings out the tension among the staffs and their general reluctance to do their duty. When Russ suggests them to keep discipline in the canteen, everybody but Mica denies. Pat orders Mica to go with him and he leaves the staff room. In the second act, the first scene kind of opens in another imagery which reasserts Trevor Rhone's idea about nothing has changed, because we hear the chaplain trying to flush the bathroom repeatedly and failing. Now, teachers order Hopal Hendry to get them lunch from the canteen, and as Hendry leaves to run the errands while the teachers mock the chaplain and his hypocritical ideas on chastity and virtue by telling bawdy jokes, during this time, Pat provokes Hendry to tell an exaggerated tale of this matter to the headmaster. The audience can only imagine that Pat means mischief. Hendry returns angrily, saying that Russ has locked down the canteen to control indiscipline amongst the students, and this does not befriend Russ with the rest of the faculty. The next scene displays Rosco and Pat spoiling Russ's efforts to clean the staff room and disciplining the students. The chaplain backs out when he's asked to help with a fund for underprivileged students. Hendry is also confronted by Russ, and some say that it is rather tactless and insensitive of him for his incompetence and lack of knowledge. Now, Russ also confronts Rosco for shrugging off his responsibilities, who dismisses it out of hand, questioning Russ's authority to question his actions. The next scene, in a way, is also reminiscent of what has been happening in the previous scenes, because Russ is cornered by from all the sides, where the chaplain accuses him of starting the welfare fund without his permission. There are rumors rampant around Russ for getting a student pregnant and having alleged illicit relationships with another boy. Now, Hendry and the chaplain sustain the rumor and ask for a disciplinary meeting when they see some crude drawings about Russ's accusations on the blackboard. They vote for his removal from the staff and also carries the tale to the headmaster. Very interestingly, it is Rosco who openly supports Russ, while Joe tacitly lends support. Russ explained that he was only helping the two students in distress. He says that he was trying to get the girl who was raped by her aunt's boyfriend and was impregnated as a result to get an abortion and to find her some safe lodging. But Mica refuses to believe it. And then Russ, in total despair, decides to resign. Now, Mica, we see, meekly follows Pat out as he orders her to come with him. Now, Hendry triumphantly declares that he will ask a classmate who, probably as incompetent and inefficient and underqualified that he is, to apply for the position that Russ has vacated. In the end, Pat and Rosco, they mourn Russ's leaving the school, and they also notice and for the first time acknowledge all the good things that Russ has done for the school, because for the first time the teeming bathroom is clean and the students look to be more disciplined. And Pat snubs Hopal Hendry, who tries to call him a brother, and saying that he will never be brother to somebody like him. Now, when we look at the characters of Russ Dacre, you will probably notice that it's an imperfect anagram of the word crusader. And his almost missionary zeal to bring about social change around him is also noticeable. In one way, he is very reminiscent of the character of Sidney Poitier in that iconic film To Serve With Love. He's an eager member of the staff, but his zealous, self-righteous efforts disturb the complacency of those already in power. He also helps a student who, as I have already mentioned, gets pregnant by rape to get lodging for her, which would be safe, and an abortion. Now, he can be considered somewhat insensitive towards Hopal Hendry and rather tactless in the dealings with the other members of the staff, but he is also repeatedly shown to be kind and conscientious as he sets up a welfare fund, withstanding multiple obstacles which the chaplain drops in his way. Now, he protests against the indiscipline, incompetence and unsanitary condition of the school and the general standards of the education system. Now, the other character, Rosco Callender, is probably one of the most complicated character which Trevor Rhone has ever created. He's intelligent, but he's waggish. Throughout the play, he's seen doing his best to sabotage Russ's efforts, and he's also a thief who steals other people's things. He's irresponsible and he's laid back in his duty towards the school. He has a caustic wit which he uses indiscriminately to enrage his colleagues. When the colleagues get together for the character assassination of Russ, he's the only person who vocally supports him, and he also very openly mourns his resignation. The other teacher, Mr. Joseph, who is considered to be the oldest faculty member there, Joe, is the senior-most member of the faculty, as I already said, and he's always shown to be brooding in the staff room. He's conservative and nostalgic of the previous standards of education in the school, And he also condemns Henry's incompetence, but does not condemn him as a person, because he blames the system instead for having him as he is, for training him so inadequately and putting him in this position. He's mostly silent, but also makes certain rare but insightful observations. In the end, Joe shows his disapproval towards everything that Hopal Hendry has done when Hopal Hendry calls him brother, and he refuses his efforts to be close, as he says he will never be the brother of somebody like Hendry. Now, the chaplain, Mr. Steele, is a hypocritical pervert. And he throws lecherous glances at Mica and attempts to molest her when she faints in fright over Roscoe's prank with the mouse. He speaks of virtue and chastity, yet makes lascivious remarks about the female staff and the students. He initially supports Russ, but maligns him and conspires with Hendry to malign him further to the management so that he ends up losing his job. He makes pompous comments about his high social and political influence, but he uses none to help others. It has also been implied that he has initially and previously molested several students and lady members of the faculty. The next character that we look at is Hopal Hendry, and he starts off as an ignorant and incompetent but well-meaning member of the staff. But later, he turns against Russ when he confronts him over his general incompetence. He is initially shown to be a meek and mild teacher in the first few scenes of the play, but he gradually shows his spite under the chaplain's and Pat's provocation. And he's the one who starts the character assassination of Russ and triumphs when Russ leaves the school. Pat Campbell, the other character that we look at, the remaining teacher that we look at, is proud and pompous, but he dislikes exerting himself for the students who he always considers to be beneath him. He has a relationship with Mica and gets jealous of Russ when Mica shows preference for him. He spitefully provokes Hendry to give an exaggerated report to the headmaster against Russ. He questions Russ's authority when he attempts to discipline the lax working habits of the staff. Mica McAdam, who is shown to be the only female faculty member, is a curious mixture of submission and assertion. She's attractive, but with a fickle emotional loyalty. She's interested in Russ and thereby in his methods of improving the conditions in the school, but she does not really have any personality of her own and cannot quite think on her own. She switches her loyalty readily from Pat to Russ and then again goes back to Pat, again depending upon the situation. Mica's behavior suggests her belief that she is in communion with Pat Campbell. She sides up with anybody who has power. She expresses similar indignation at the unhygienic sanitation of the school and its operations, assuming the site as a base for personal relationships as well as educational ones. When confronted with apparent infidelity, she is forced to realize the need to evaluate her relationships and examine the issue of identity. The headmaster, we never see him. He's always present through his constant absence on stage. His office door is always closed, but one can hear the telltale sounds of brutal caning. He is constantly mentioned fearfully and reverently by the teachers. We also hear of rumors about his political appointment and nepotism. There are also some whispered rumors which the faculty members share about his sexual exploitation of students. Some of the major themes, let's look at some of the major themes in Rhone's work, which are visible not only in Old Story Time and Schools Out, but also other plays of Rhone's oeuvre. Now, the first one that we should acknowledge is a voice against racism. Rhone's works were noted for their in-depth analysis of racial, social, and political tensions in Jamaica. The figure of Miss Aggie, you must have noticed, is especially interesting in this respect due to the fact that her internalization of racist stereotypes fuels the conflict immensely. According to Fanon, which we might allude to at this context, for the black subject, the white other serves to define everything that is desirable, everything that the self desires. And in old story time, for Miss Aggie, anything black is not good, for life is hard when you is black. I quote. In Schools Out, Rhone portrays the dysfunctional condition of the academic condition in Jamaica, and moreover, he shows the incompetence of teachers and the lax academic standards, general indiscipline and criminal behavior from the students as a result of extreme poverty and lack of social benefits, a clear form of discrimination. Mica McAdam in Schools Out is an educated woman of color, but she always tries to align herself with the whiter and more established men. Rhone points to the women's obsession with finding solutions through white males. Now, the next theme that we can look at in Rhone's works is the portrayal of the Jamaican society. The plays of Trevor Rhone start from a time when racial discrimination was normative and accepted without any protest. It also looks at the time when education started spreading cross-racially and educated colored people were appointed in power positions, thereby giving them a dissenting voice. Now, Miss Aggie, amongst others, embodies the racist Eurocentric discourse of purity, which is portrayed as destructive to the family and therefore on another level to the Caribbean society and the ethos which controls the center of it. The acceptance of the hybridity of identities by Len and through him of his mother and the subsequent happiness in the life of the family is the ultimate call for acceptance of the Caribbean's hybrid nature. The next theme that is prevalent in Rhone's work is the ambivalent portrayal of women characters. Rhone's portrayal of female characters in a way can be categorized in three distinctive types. Firstly, there is a traditional housewife figure, the woman who is never fulfilled in her marriage, which is often polygamous and yet is unable to evade the status quo. Secondly, the younger version of this unstated wife-mother character who unsuccessfully handles family and career in an attempt to attain a prosperous harmony, but in the way she's as oppressed as the first housewifely figure. Thirdly, there is the urban career woman who supposedly is in a better position understanding herself and her ambitions in the changed social circumstances of a post-colonial hybrid society. This supposedly idealized third type is often portrayed negatively by Rhone. For example, characters like Carol in Sleeper in 1972 and Gloria in Two Can Play, in these characters, there is a decided ambivalence. Gloria in Two Can Play apparently exudes self-confidence and participating in a process of self-discovery. She is the representative of the post-colonial woman who match the redefinitions of the evolving society. But she considers migration as a partial salvation to the dilemmas of survival in her country instead of confronting it. Now, in this lesson, we have seen or we have looked into some of the tropes of post-colonial critical understanding that Trevor Rhone has utilized and has represented in his plays. We have looked into an in-depth analysis of the plot lines and the characters of the plays. Now, in the end of the lesson, there would be a short module on the self-assessment to test your understanding of the play, and if you are interested more into this lesson, there is a further reading section which is attached to the module which you might find interesting. Thank you.